if say your partner has been out all day and you hadn't heard from him or her, and as soon as they get back, you're like, "Where have you been?" La, 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 la. Immediately, there's
Right.
the attack. Instead of saying, "Hey, I missed you today. I wondering where
Yeah.
you were."
There's
See,
a
that's
difference.
vulnerability. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we think vulnerability has to be this fragile state of mind, and it's just being authentic with yourself, coming from I instead of you. You and so many people say, "Well, you need to do this, you need to do that." No,
Hmm.
I need you to. And when you can come from yourself using these I statements,
Yeah.
and it sounds all corny and everything, but it's true. When you come from yourself, that's vulnerability. When you're pointing
Yeah.
fingers, then you're not being vulnerable, and you're putting the spotlight on the other person to be vulnerable.
Hello there, and welcome to the Poison Honey Podcast, where we discuss the bitter truths of life with raw vulnerability, honesty, and a dash of humor. In this episode, I talked to Bill Simpson about his abandonment trauma and how that informed three failed marriages to finally finding love. We talk about traditional masculine conditioning and what it's like to embrace your emotions and vulnerability and how that can transform relationships and life. Again, I hope you learned something from this and I hope it resonates. Welcome, Bill.
Hey, glad to be here, Anurag. It's a beautiful thing.
And I'm going to ask you first if you want to tell us a bit about yourself and the story you want to share with us today.
Wow, how much time do you have?
uh,
I've got
let's start with an hour. We can always
yeah.
rebook.
I've got a lot of stories. I think the main story I wanted to share, is well, first of all, I started out as a child, so we'll start there. Um, my parents had gotten divorced. I was the youngest of five, and my parents were divorced around the age of six. And I went to live with my mother for a couple of years. By the time I was 8 years old, she decided to give custody to my father. And I didn't see her after that. And subsequently, she died of a heart attack at the age of 13. I was 13. And so I never saw her in between that period. And I share this because it ended up having a big impact on my relationships. And as early as I could remember, even dating in high school, that I was one that always kind of overlapped in relationship, meaning that I would be with someone and then I'd find interest in another and then I would, move on to the next one and never really gave myself any time to be by myself.
Yeah.
And I didn't know at that time what that was all about. And then move forward, I was on a very popular morning show here in Philadelphia, and I have to say that the temptations were out there for me, especially with women. And I was married to my first wife, and as much as I hate to admit it, I strayed. I was not faithful, and my wife and I got along great. We didn't have any problems. It's just that I was too immature to really be in a committed relationship at that time. And uh, so what happened was being married to my first wife, someone that I started to see again overlapping, and I ended up marrying her. And so, we were together for about 10 years. She had four kids, and we had a daughter together. And I had at least matured to the point where I was faithful. I did not stray, even though there were a lot of temptations. I just learned my lesson in that regard.
Yeah.
And then that relationship dissolved, and I'm not here to throw my exes under the bus. It's just me taking responsibility for my part. And I realized in that relationship that, and through therapy, that the reason why I had been overlapping relationships was
Mm-hmm.
because of that abandonment of my mom, right?
Right.
And so I didn't, had no idea at the time, but it really had impact on my life. And so I learned that lesson. And then I also learned that because I was making a lot of money at the time and the main breadwinner of the family, I was controlling with it. I made all the
Mm.
financial decisions, and I wasn't doing it from a selfish perspective. It's just what I thought I was supposed to do,
Yeah.
being doing the man's role and all that stuff. And so I found myself controlling, became aware of that, and it kind of shook me because I didn't think I was. And I could have easily denied it and just kept on doing it, but no,
Right.
I decided, I got to learn from this. And so that was a big learning. Also, I was seeing myself as the the knight in shining armor.
Mm.
That syndrome where I was saving my wife who had four kids and was,
Yeah.
all that stuff, and I'm the savior here. And so, that was my ego. That was, all that stuff that I had been conditioned to be. And so that relationship ended up dissolving, and I finally was by myself. I had a 27 room house, and the night my wife and her kids and my daughter moved out, I was in the middle of the living room by myself for the first time and just bawling my eyes out. I just
Yeah.
felt so alone, and so scared, and yet that was the best thing that happened to me because it gave me a chance to learn to be with myself,
Yeah.
you know. And so with that, continuing with therapy, I was doing a lot of training myself. I learned a lot about relationships. My mentor was a relationship counselor. And so I felt like I knew all this stuff about relationship, took it to the next one, only to be in a similar dynamic.
Yeah.
although the roles had shifted at that point because I was no longer doing the morning show, the radio show. I had taken a zero off my salary, and the women that I
Mm.
ended up meeting through Tai Chi and those kind of activities, thinking that I found the one.
Yeah.
Um, she ended up being the breadwinner, well,
Uh,
and I was the other role, and that was a very awkward role for
yeah.
me as a man to depend on her instead of the other way around.
Yeah.
And so that certainly had impact. And during that time, I was, shifting to become a holistic health practitioner and getting away from that celebrity status and doing the
Mm.
radio thing and really, really following my passion of holistic health. Opened up my own practice. And as time went on, I was, that was becoming more and more my identity. And I think my ex just didn't really connect with me that way, even though we
Okay.
met with Tai Chi, right?
Yeah.
We would think, but she kind of, saw it the other way, and so that relationship ended up where I felt like I was by myself in a relationship, and I had learned at that time like I would rather be alone than feel
Mm.
alone in a relationship.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like I was being identified. Like she was identifying me, and I tried to live up to what she wanted from me,
Yeah.
instead of really being true to myself.
Yeah.
And so that relationship ended. And at that point, three divorces, I was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to go live amongst life. you
Yeah.
know, uh, I'm like, I'm going to give up on this relationship thing because as much as I've learned about it and understand relationship, I just didn't seem to be very good at it. At least that's what I thought.
Yeah.
So I was living in one room in someone's house. I had two kids, but they were living with my ex, and I was just kind of a mess. And then one night I was and I just lost my job. I had been laid off my radio job,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
not the morning show, but I was still in radio, but doing the holistic health thing too. And so after that, it was just like I don't know what I'm going to do. I was just trying to find myself again and really be true to myself. And one evening I was sitting in meditation, and I'd been meditating for quite a while, and then this message comes to me and says, "It is time. Like Rafiki in The Lion King, right?
Yeah,
And I'm like, what? You've got to be kidding. And it was so strong. And I was really called to go on this website called Conscious Match. And I'm like, really? Like, how am I even going to do a profile right now? You know?
yeah.
And but it was so strong that I had to trust it. My intuition was just screaming at me to do it. I went on, I put profile out, I cleaned it up quite a bit, but I was
Mm-hmm.
honest. And 3 days later, I get poked by this woman who was on another site called Spiritual Singles. But I guess they were connected by the same,
Yeah.
thing. And so she poked at me, and then I told her right off the bat, what was going on, with my life, divorce, kids, no job, living in one room in somebody's house. And for some reason, she decided to stick around and get to know me a little bit more. And we did all this. We did our values clarification, everything before we even talked to each other on the phone.
Mm. Wow.
And so, because like, what's the point? Like, if they don't have the same values,
Yeah.
and like, how are we going to make it work, right? So all the boxes were checked, and then we decided to have a conversation, and that was going well. And then we decided to meet. And the moment we met, the moment our eyes met, I had this feeling in my heart that I'm home. I am
Wow.
home. And we've been together for over 16 years. So
Wow. That is,
yeah,
thank you for sharing that. That
yeah.
is a beautiful story. And I like how you framed it that if you found a home in someone's eyes,
Hmm.
that's very poetic in a way.
Yes.
But,
But
but
here I was going to give up on relationships,
yeah,
and then when that intuition led me to what, if I didn't listen, who knows where I would be right now.
yeah, and I think given the situation as you explained it, it would have been easy, right, to be like, well, relationships aren't for me because here I am, like divorced 3 times. I give up and yeah, just go along your way. And but yeah, choosing to follow your intuition gave you this beautiful relationship in the end. And how was it? Because you mentioned more towards the beginning of your story about the abandonment trauma that you
Hmm.
had for your mom. How was it, basically that healing journey and coming into this relationship for you?
Yeah, well, as I said, that it was an abandonment issue because the reason why I was overlapping these relationships because I was afraid that they would leave me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Subconsciously, not
Yeah,
consciously.
yeah,
And so I would make sure that I had someone so they wouldn't leave me, and I'd always have somebody
yeah,
that I wouldn't be abandoned. And if I hadn't gone to therapy and done some deep workshops and kind of thing, like doing a lot of primal work and all kinds of things to really heal from that, allow myself to feel the pain of that, the pain of the loss, and as kids, we're pretty much resilient in trauma if we understand what's going on. And I really didn't understand, but I felt like I had a relatively happy childhood in spite of it.
yeah.
But I had no idea the ramifications that the loss of my mom and her, first of all, abandoning me literally
Mm-hmm.
by not seeing me, and then she died. It was permanent,
Right. Yeah.
and so through therapy, and thank God, I had the drive to do that. That I learned to understand those feelings and honor those feelings, and respect those feelings, so I could clear the way to be in a healthy relationship.
Yeah. And if I hear that therapy was an important role in this. I think there's a stigma around therapy, even
Sure.
still till this day. Even though I hear more and more people do seek out some kind of therapy. But I wonder how is that for men to, like, what are, because I think you're, as you said, conditioned differently than women towards certain things. And I think that not showing emotion is like one of those things.
Yeah.
So how was it for you as a man to make this decision to go to therapy?
Yeah. It was actually a friend of mine. I was having lunch, and he referred to me. He said, "I've been talking to this woman. Maybe it might help." And I think I was just at a point where I knew I needed something.
Yeah.
And I was always kind of interested in personal growth, or fitness, like doing things that made me feel better as a person. And I'd been involved spiritually as well. So I said, well, let me give it a shot. And actually, I'd had one therapist that my prior experience with therapy was when my stepson went to this to a therapist, and I saw in the lobby they had these pamphlets, and it was talking about fathers who weren't emotionally available for their sons,
Mm.
right? And that's another part of my story, is that my father was a functional alcoholic, and he
All
was
right.
there physically, but emotionally he wasn't there. So it piqued my interest. I decided to make an appointment, and this guy was like, he was a nice guy and everything, but
Mm.
he would start yawning in the middle of our
Oh,
session.
wow.
He would be checking his watch. And
Yeah.
I just really didn't feel like he was invested in my growth.
No.
So that was a bad experience. And then I had, a couple years later, I get this, having lunch with this guy, and he's like, no, 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 she's really great. She's very cutting edge. She's not your typical therapist. And so I went, and I really connected with her.
Yeah.
And I think having a woman therapist was really helpful for me as a man, especially having been abandoned by my mom, right?
Right. Yeah.
So learning all these things. So yeah, I mean, it does go against our conditioning as men to keep your story to yourself, be stoic, don't talk about your emotions. Just
Yeah.
it's just that's history. You don't have to just move forward. So when I would tell certain friends that I was seeking therapy, like they would joke about it, or
Mm-hmm.
make light of it. But for the most part, I felt supported. But the main thing was that I did feel I was getting the support that I needed, and I was growing, and I was feeling great about it. So
Yeah.
that's what helped me to continue to go. And I think if you get the right therapist or mentor, and when you're on the right track, then I think everybody needs that.
Yeah. And I think you touch upon a very important point because I went through several therapists
Hmm.
also before, starting like as a teenager, and I I had a similarly well, he wasn't horrible. It's just that some things that this specific thing that he said kind of triggered me to an extent that I didn't want to go to therapist anymore.
Sure, yeah.
Because it was, yeah, you should get a job and not contemplate about like life and these things anymore, which I found very odd.
Not very
Um,
supportive, really.
no, so I thought, then that triggered some kind of like conspiracy theory that therapists like want
Hmm.
to like have us docile and like in the system and just working and these things and not questioning things, which is very hard for me not to question things. That's like
Sure, sure.
my natural setting.
Hmm.
So that actually delayed me from seeking any other therapist for some time. And then I started working with someone who was, I think she just studied psychology, and I was like her test bunny. And that
Mm.
went okay for a while. But then we started having issues because you start mingling like the therapy and forming a friendship and trying to
Ah,
do
the
business
boundaries.
together.
Yeah.
It didn't go well. So
Hmm. Hmm.
and then I actually found someone else, and I had 2 sessions with her, and that was enough.
Mm.
That's all I needed. So I
Yeah,
do think, from my own experience, it's so important to find the right person. I'm not saying that everyone will like be done in 2 sessions, but just to show how it can speed up things if you have like the right guidance. And
absolutely.
yeah, of course, you take the time you need with it, but it's yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so important to feel safe and connected with your therapist. And what can happen, like what happened to me, what happened to you, it's like, well, then I could have given up on therapy altogether.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't been referred by someone that I really trusted, I don't know, I might be still repeating the same patterns I was doing, all my life.
Yeah.
And then that just propelled me to from therapy to go to workshops to do trainings of my own. Just growing consistently growing, personally, spiritually, and it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
It's not a one shot deal. It's a lifetime of growth.
And at some point you started sharing this also because you have a podcast yourself, talking to men.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's where this all came from was this struggle of three divorces and almost giving up on relationship to finding it at a later stage in my life and realize that all the skills that I had learned I could apply to this relationship. It also depends on who you're with, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just because you know the skills that it's going to work out. You've got to be with somebody that appreciates those skills and
Right.
is open to the different ways to be in a relationship and grow in a relationship. And so I had been a mind body educator and integrative therapy practitioner. I still am at a major health clinic here in Philadelphia. And through that, most of my clientele were women.
Mm.
And I would hear all these things about the men in their lives. Like,
Yeah.
he's not doing this, he's not doing, like, they wouldn't be, they're looking for vulnerability, they're looking for accountability, they're looking
Yeah.
for empathy. And I'd say, well, what if he were to say this? And, and they were like, oh man, that would make all the difference in the world.
Right.
And so I'm like, all right, I think I could help these guys, right?
Yeah.
And so then I started to work with some men in my practice and some of the partners of the women that I saw in my practice, and
Mm-hmm.
and realizing it's twofold. It's my own experience of almost giving up on relationship,
Yeah.
recognizing all the things I was doing wrong, what didn't work in a relationship, to finally, I was an expert in that, and then finally
Yeah.
to be an expert in how I can help with, communication, help with vulnerability, to help with building trust and intimacy and all those things. And that's when I decided, okay, ding, light bulb went off. It's time for me to help men out here. And so I started a podcast a few years back called Men on the Path to Love,
Mm-hmm.
where I share stories, often my story, and stories of my clients. I don't use their real names,
Right.
but I share the stories and their experiences of the work that I do. And so that's my encore career. I'm semi-retired right now. I'm still working a couple days a week doing the clinical job, which keeps me in that groove. And I'm here to serve men and help men and women,
Right.
finding more relationship and connection in their lives.
And would you say that, because you mentioned like communication and vulnerability, would this be one of the biggest points of issues that you encounter or people in general
Yeah,
encounter in relationship?
yeah. I would say needs conflicts is
Mm.
one. That's probably the big one, and then to go along with that is the communication piece. How do
Yeah.
I communicate? How do I communicate my needs?
Yeah.
How do I communicate it in a way that's going to be most receptive?
Yeah.
And so I teach a lot about active listening and reflective listening, where the couple would sit there. One of the couple would say what they had to say. The other person would just listen, and
Yeah.
then they would reflect back to them what they just said.
Mm.
So they would say, "Well, I heard you say ABC." Well, I actually said ABX. Okay,
Right.
so it's
Yeah.
ABX? Yes. Ah, okay. So that
Yeah.
person feels seen and heard, right? Before
Yes.
you even get into solving the problem, you just got to be seen and heard. And
Mm.
then you can switch the roles, and then you do the same thing with the other person. And then once you both feel seen and heard, then you can start to work at the problem.
Right.
And what happens so many times, especially with men, it's just right out of the gate, they get defensive. No, I didn't. I didn't
Mm.
do that. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, women do it too.
Yeah.
Um, but men are more notorious for doing that. And so it's just sometimes it's just pulling back the reins and just be quiet, put your hand over your mouth and just listen.
Yeah.
And listen to understand, not listen to say what you need to say and rebuttal. It's like, no, just
Yeah.
listen. And it doesn't mean it's right or wrong, or she's right or wrong, or he's right or wrong. It's what their experience is.
Mm. Yeah.
So you can say, even though you feel like you didn't do anything wrong, you can say, well, I'm sorry you experienced me that way. Tell me more. How did I do that? Because I don't want to do that to you. And so you can see how that brings in vulnerability to say it
Yeah.
that way, versus getting defensive and pushing back. And then when that happens, the whole communication process shuts down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think that's, as you were mentioning that, I think that's even important in any type of relationship,
sure.
be it romantic or, at the workplace or just everything. We need to learn to listen better and understand where that person is coming from and not be afraid of kind of telling them, well, I didn't understand what you said. Can you repeat that? Or did you
Yeah,
mean this or that? And I think there's just something maybe culturally where we don't dare ask, or we don't want to seem stupid that we didn't understand someone, and
right,
or
right.
as you said, we become defensive, and we need to have our it's like a debate, right? We need to have our
Yeah,
answer
yeah,
ready, so that we can defend ourselves. Or as I think is the meme, I feel attacked. Like you
yeah,
attacked me.
exactly. Yeah.
So,
And
so
you brought up something important. You said, asking or saying, I don't understand. I need to know more. That in itself is vulnerability.
yeah,
We can act like we know what they're talking about, or get defensive, and the vulnerability is out the window. But,
yeah,
it's a simple act of vulnerability to say, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Can you tell me more? Or how did I do that? Because I want to know, and be curious versus gearing up to be defensive.
yeah.
And that's the vulnerability.
And in your experience, has it been hard to get people to be vulnerable?
Yeah, especially men.
Yeah,
And yet I am, I keep saying it goes both ways. Men and women, we're about the same. It's just how we've been conditioned that we want to change.
yeah.
And then it's about a mindset. And when I can get men to open up to the mindset of vulnerability, then they think, oh, well, that means I have to cry and I have to show all this
Mm,
emotion and all that stuff. And like I just said, I'm not sure I don't understand what you're saying. That's vulnerability.
yeah,
If, say, your partner has been out all day and you hadn't heard from him or her, and as soon as they get back, you're like, "Where have you been?" La, 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 la. Immediately, there's
right.
the attack instead of saying, "Hey, I missed you today. I'm wondering where
Yeah.
you were." See, and
There's a
that's
difference.
vulnerability. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And we think vulnerability has to be this fragile state of mind, and it's just being authentic with yourself, coming from I instead of you. And so many people say, "Well, you need to do this, you need to do that." No,
Hmm.
I need you to. And when you can come from yourself using these I statements,
Yeah,
and it sounds all corny and everything, but it's true. When you come from yourself, that's vulnerability. When you're pointing
yeah.
fingers, then you're not being vulnerable, and you're putting the spotlight on the other person to be vulnerable.
Yeah, I think there's a difference as well in what you said. That I say I was worried. For example,
Mhm.
I didn't hear from you all day.
Right, that's
Are
another
you
one. Yeah.
okay?
Yeah,
Then where were you? That if someone asks you like, where were you? It seems like they're accusing you of
exactly.
being like,
Yeah,
secretive
yeah,
and being somewhere that you weren't supposed to be, and that might trigger the person, and then you get this ball going that maybe you
yeah.
didn't intend to get going, and now you're both mad.
Sure.
Yeah, so yeah, I
Yeah,
think
and that can be because of their own insecurity, for
right.
whatever their history is growing up, right?
Yeah.
And they, maybe they've been in a relationship where someone cheated on them, so they're going to be extra,
Mm,
conscious of what all the other person's doing and be
yeah.
suspect and not trust. And it's again being vulnerable with that and taking ownership of that versus having it come out all sideways where it just makes a mess of everything.
Right. Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's very important to, um, as you said, really knowing your inner knowledge. I think is the word that you used.
The
Yeah,
intuition, yeah, trusting your
yeah,
gut, trusting your heart, and then trust your mind,
right.
because your gut and your heart's going to know before your brain does. And that's another thing that guys tend to stay in their heads. It's all logic, 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 and
Yeah.
they're not getting in touch with what's going on in their heart or their gut, and balancing that logic with some intuition
Hmm.
to make better choices.
Would that be because of like the stigma, or the conditioning on men to
Hmm.
push everything away that is seemingly feminine?
Hmm.
But yeah, I think we don't teach men enough that, well, we both have both, um, women and men have both energies to work with, and you have both
Exactly.
sides of the brain, so you have to balance that out. But I think there's a lot of pressure on men on being like the crying thing. I think is the biggest example. Like little
Hmm.
boys get told like, you're a guy, don't cry. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's
big
that's
boys
very
don't
damaging.
cry.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually did an episode on my podcast called "Big Boys Should Cry," because there's
Yeah.
actually scientific evidence that crying is good for you.
Yeah.
There's so many physiological benefits, emotional benefits to crying, and that's one way I kind of lead guys into it because they all want to. They're
Yeah.
just terrified to do it. They think they're never going to stop, or they're going to be judged, or they're going to be considered
Right.
weak. And the strength is owning it and letting yourself feel so you can free yourself from it. I mean,
Right.
when I was doing therapy, I did cry therapy workshops where we would go in and deliberately go in there to cry,
Right.
and I just felt so free afterwards. It's like, man,
Yeah.
this is awesome. I want everybody to do this because
Right, it's a release of energy. As you were
it
saying
is.
that, I was reminded of a moment that I was sitting with a friend that was a guy, and I was crying, and he said, "I haven't cried in years." And I, in the middle, even if my state that I was, I remember thinking, "Well, that's why would you brag about that?
Yeah,
That you
right,
should cry."
right.
Maybe you should
Exactly.
cry, you
Yeah.
know?
Try it
Yeah.
sometime.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
think it's a release of, emotions, at least how I experience it. And I imagine that's for most people, that you release everything that you've been kind of stacking up inside, and that kind
Sure.
of frees you up to actually finding solutions free of like the heaviness of all that emotion. And that is usually when you make the better decisions, because if you stay in that state and you make those decisions in those states, usually it doesn't really come out very great.
Exactly.
In
It's
my
you stuff it
experience.
and it only makes it
Yeah.
worse. And
Right.
I remember years and years ago when I was, starting to allow myself to cry as a man and, get in touch with that. And sometimes I knew I needed to cry and I couldn't cry. And
Mm.
so I put together a playlist. I had like 10 songs on it that were just
Yeah.
tear jerkers for me. And if I didn't get into like if I didn't cry by the third song, it was like no hope.
Yeah.
And I did it just to deliberately get that out of me. And if like you said, there's it's just such a relief once you do that. And I think once guys get over that first hump of doing it,
Yeah.
I've had guys do that where I do energy work too, and had a guy on the table and he said he hadn't cried and since he was a kid or something, and
Uh,
some stuff we were releasing, and all of a sudden, boom, I see the tear come down. I'm like,
yeah.
and he just started sobbing, and I just stayed present with him. And he was like, wow, you made me cry, man. Like, and he goes, I do feel better. I do feel better. And,
Yeah.
and I was just, honored that he felt safe enough to be able to do that, in
Right.
my presence, you know.
Yeah. I think what you just said is important, that safe space, to
Mhm.
allow people to cry. And I'm thinking maybe that's, you know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously I'm not a man, but I can imagine that, as a man going into a marriage or a relationship, you have a certain expectation due to that same programming of like what you're supposed to be like, and
Sure.
that energy that you're supposed to exhibit. And I can imagine that just that kind of stops you from feeling safe enough of like crying in front of your partner, because then you might have this idea that we perceive you as weak, or and you
Hmm.
don't want to be perceived as weak by
Right.
your wife, because you're supposed to be like the
The
person
strong
that's
one, and yeah,
strong and taking care of everything. And yeah, and I can even recognize that in some of the language that I hear men using towards other men, that you're some kind of feminine slur if
yeah,
you
yeah.
cry, or yeah.
Yeah, I had a guy, well, I was a coach that I was working with, and as I was working with him, I could see more and more of his like toxic masculinity stuff coming out,
Yeah.
and it was really starting to concern me. And we had a dispute over the payment stuff. It was he was in the wrong,
Mm.
and he just texted me and said, "Spoken like a true, true feminized man."
Yeah. Wow.
Like he didn't see the value in that. And there are men that you're not going to convince
Mm.
that what I'm doing is good for them. They
Yeah.
see me as weak, feminized, and all that. And it's not about losing any of your masculinity.
No.
It's keeping that your traditional masculine qualities, and then blending in that vulnerability,
Yeah.
blending in the compassion, blending in empathy,
Yeah.
and being open to growth. So it's enhancing all that you already have. It's not
Yeah.
getting rid of any of it, right?
Right. And in
Yeah.
fact, I think most women would prefer that to,
Yeah. Yeah.
someone in
Yeah.
touch with their emotions, that can like healthily be vulnerable about it, and still
Sure.
have that yeah, masculine energy. I know there's also some women that are in that same mindset, that also are um, kind of pushing the same idea that if you're a man you cry, and they don't like that because they're in that same
Right.
mindset, and yeah,
Exactly.
the
Yeah,
toxic
and I was going
masculinity.
to yeah, I was going to add that because some women I've talked to in my practice, like, I don't want to see a man cry because, that he's soft, and I don't want to be the strong one. I'm not the man.
Yeah.
And I trying to get them to understand that, yeah, you don't want to be with somebody who's boohooing all the time and weak, and, like that's not so, it's not being vulnerable. It's like being a victim, or being, just allowing life to take over. And
Mm.
who wants to be with someone that's like that, right? Just crying all
Yeah.
the time, complaining all the time, whining, and, showing signs of weakness. It's when you can own it and be real with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the strength comes in. And yeah, so
Yeah.
you don't want to be with somebody that's weak, but that just because they cry, it's not a sign of weakness.
Right.
It's a sign of strength. And trying to convince some women of that, it's an uphill climb. And,
Yeah.
you're not going to convince everybody of what I'm talking about. Yet that's part of my love mission is, to put some awareness out here,
Yeah.
that it is possible. Because if I had stayed in that traditional conditioning and the way I was trying to live, I certainly wouldn't be in the relationship I am right now, and it's thriving. I mean, it just keeps getting better all the time. The older we get, the better it is, and
Yeah.
thank God. So,
Yeah, that is so beautiful. And yeah, I think because a lot of the people that condition men to begin with are the mothers, right? That say you
mm-hmm.
shouldn't cry because you're a man. And so yeah, I think that we also have a hand in that,
Sure.
in becoming better in that, and how we teach our little boys to be vulnerable, so
Mm-hmm.
they can be healthy men, in the future, and maybe have, because I think once the men grow up, and some of these men, due to their pent up emotions, they become aggressive, then we
Mm-hmm.
we become, yeah, scared. Some of us become the victims of that. So I think it's also good for us if we are able to allow men this safe space to be more vulnerable, to show their emotions,
Hmm.
and recognize, as you said, that it is strength, and tell them, you're being strong because you're able to show your emotion and grow from it. I think that would be much better if we can get
Yeah.
more people. Yeah, as we concluded,
Well,
not everyone will be there.
of
Yeah.
course. Yeah. Yeah. And, and sometimes what happens is when well, I say it happens all the time. When we're in a relationship, we bring all of our childhood to the relationship, our
Mm,
relationship with our family, friends, everybody, all that we've had in the past, we bring it into the relationship. And so when, say, my little boy gets triggered by something my wife may have done,
yeah.
if I didn't understand that that was my little boy, my experience with my mom or being, whatever, um, then I'm acting like a child.
Yeah.
And so if I'm crying like a child, or I'm having a temper tantrum as a child, then who wants to be with that in a relationship? You're not
Yeah.
in a relationship to be with a child. You're in a relationship to be with an adult.
Right.
So it's up to me to take care of that little boy inside of me. That's, the grown up is aware that this is coming
Yeah.
out. So I'm not going to bring that to my wife. I got to take care of him. And if you don't know that, and the little boy inside of me is, if I don't know it and I'm going to my wife for her to take care of me,
Yeah.
then that's when the woman's like, ugh, I don't want,
Right.
no, I don't want that. I'm not here to take care of you. But
Yeah.
if I can just say, hey, listen, I'm having a really hard day, and and I just need a hug or I need to cry,
Yeah.
um, but I got to take care of all that other junk, then that makes her feel safe.
Yeah. And I think that what you also just said, a lot of women, or I've heard a lot of women express that they feel like they become someone's mom once they
Yeah,
uh, get married.
exactly.
And yeah, I think that's this dynamic, but we don't have those words to say, like, you don't have a healthy relationship with your inner child, where that you
Right.
take care of it and then come to me. You come to me, with your having to, or wanting me to take care of your inner child, which is not my job. Yeah.
Right. And so many of most of our behavior is so subconscious,
Mm,
like what do they say, like 98% or something. So it's all the pattern of what we grew up witnessing and had modeled for us.
yeah.
And when we're not aware that that impacts our relationship, then we can repeat these patterns over and over and wonder, why am I with the
Right.
same guy or the same woman? Like, why do I keep getting the same people like that?
Yeah.
Well, it's because you're not aware of the patterns that you've established, since childhood.
Yeah.
And that's the advantage of therapy, to process that stuff so that you don't bring it into your relationship in a negative way or
Yeah.
expect her to take care of you. You know,
Exactly.
be my mommy. I need mommy.
Yeah.
Like,
No, we
no,
don't
no,
want
no,
that.
no, we don't want that. No.
Especially if you have children that they already have, like,
Yeah.
babies
I'm
to take
already
care.
taking care of these kids. I don't need to
Right.
take care of another one. Exactly. Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
like the classic sitcom
Yes.
scenario.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, I think to summarize what we were saying, that we basically, I think the conclusion we came to is work on your inner child, go to therapy, and get the tools for this. And I think that is one of the best skills that you can learn as an adult. That is, in fact, what I learned with that last therapist. That's why I just
Hmm.
needed the 2 sessions, because,
Sure.
as I said, I kept repeating cycles, and she just taught me, okay, this situation is due to that core situation. What would you have done differently, and how can you protect your inner child and comfort her? And yeah, that's basically what I did ever since. I have a reaction to something, and I sometimes I allow myself to feel the emotions and cry and whatever,
Sure.
be angry, and then I start noticing, okay, I'm in this mood for quite some time now. What is going on? Where is this coming from? And how can I comfort that inner child? And then go back to the person or whatever that
Yeah.
caused this and try to solve things. So I think that is one of the most basic skills that we should all learn.
Sure. I mean, I
Yeah.
have a great gauge of that is when I'm just like pissy with my wife, like inside, like I'm just
Yeah.
I'm irritated, and she's not doing anything for me to
Yeah.
say anything about. But I just want to.
Yeah.
That's when I know my little boy, my inner child's out.
Yeah.
Because my adult, when I know, oh well, we talked about not stacking the dishes or cleaning,
Mm.
whatever, I can go and address that as an adult.
Yeah.
But if I don't know what's bothering me and I just want to her, then it's my little boy, and I got to take care of him.
Yeah.
Because imagine if I'm just going off and being all agitated with her, and there's no reason for me to be that way, how that would make
Yeah.
her feel,
Yeah.
right? And so many people do that. They're not aware. And so
Mm.
there again, it comes out sideways, and there's a real mess.
Yeah.
And there's one thing I wanted to add in terms of the inner child that absolutely changed my life. Was my therapist told me to get a little boy doll.
Ah.
And I, first of all, to find a boy doll was really hard. It took me
Right.
2 years to
Yeah.
find it. And one day I was at this Toys R Us with my daughter, and I saw this kind of like a Cabbage Patch doll. It had brown hair, like a little mohawk kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and he had blue eyes, no eyebrows. So I said, something about this doll. So I went and got markers from a craft store, and I covered in some of his hair, gave him eyebrows, and then I made his eyes brown, and
Mm.
I started to cry. Like
Wow.
I found my little boy. I could hug him and hold him, and I could take care of him. I could be the mom that, didn't go away.
Yeah.
I could be the dad that was emotionally available. And I swear, I mean, I recommend it to all my patients. I have my little boy doll at my office, my clinical practice, and I show it to them. Immediately they start getting choked up just thinking about
Uh,
it. And then they go
yeah.
out and find their little doll, and it makes all the difference in the world because they can actually hold and take care of that thing.
Yeah.
Uh, and that tangible holding and feeling and actually looking into the eyes of that doll create a shift inside of us. And that
Mm.
helps us take care of that little boy instead of being angry with him or we're judgmental or shame and all that stuff that we
Yeah.
can do to ourselves.
And that actually makes sense for me in a sense that that is also one of the things that are stigmatized. Like little boys are not allowed to play with dolls, right?
Yeah,
Because it's
right.
feminine. Um,
Exactly.
and I think that playing with dolls, at least as someone that was a little girl, uh, it helped me to like converse. Like you talk to them, you take
Yeah,
care of them.
pretend. Yeah,
Yeah, so it does give you maybe subconsciously this more sense of taking care of yourself and these things. And even
exactly.
so, you know, we also have our journey of learning to take care of ourselves, but it's different. I think that that might be one of the things because we are from a young age taught to take care of usually of other people, right? But you
Exactly.
still have this care in you, and you just have to switch to take care of yourself. But I can
Yeah.
imagine that it's then different for men just realizing, that caring and caring for yourself. And yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's so beautiful.
It was a big awakening, and it's a great metaphor for self-compassion. And
Yeah.
when I work with men, that's usually what I start with is self-compassion. It's learning
Yeah.
to love yourself as you would someone you care about. And we are not conditioned to do that.
No.
Men, women, most of our society, we're not. It's a
Yeah.
learned behavior, and it takes some time and effort to do it. And yet, once you do, it makes a big difference. I mean, for a long, long, long time. Every day I write 10 things about that I love about myself every day.
Nice.
And it's just, we've got to love ourselves before we can expect anyone to really love us and
Yeah.
to love others fully if we don't love ourselves.
Yeah. That is beautiful. And think important point that all of us have to learn. I think everyone on their own pace. But
Yeah.
I think that if you really want to get to growth, meaningful growth, not only like monetary and these things that really personal growth and spiritual growth that you have to come to this realization. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think I want to ask you if there's anything, the last thing that you would like to share with the
Well, I
audience.
appreciate that. And I think it's what I just said. Really, is coming from loving yourself, understanding yourself, appreciating yourself, and really taking the time to do that. Men, women, both. I mean, we all need to do that
Yeah,
because if you're a nurturer and you're trying to take care of everybody else and you're not taking care of you, then you're gonna fall at some point, right?
yeah,
And if you're trying to get in a relationship and you're not loving yourself, you're focused on your partner and not yourself, then that's going to cause problems in a relationship. So
yeah,
learn to love yourself. It's the greatest love of all, as they say. So
right. Oh, thank you
as
so
the song
much.
says. Well,
Yeah,
thank you, Monarch. I
yeah,
really appreciate what you're doing and just getting the word out that vulnerability is strength and courage. And, I just resonated so much with what you're doing. So thank you.
yeah. Thank you for reaching out and joining me on this episode and having this very vulnerable conversation about your journey and really discovering your inner child and taking care of your inner child. And yeah, I thank you for teaching other men also for taking care of their inner child and women, as you said, because you work with both.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think it's very important work that you're doing. And where can people find you again if they are interested in your work?
Well, the podcast is Men on the Path to Love, and you can find that anywhere you get your podcasts. And my website is menonthepathtolove.com. And you can contact me there. I offer a free 1 hour coaching session. And like you said, sometimes 1 or 2 sessions is all you need
Right.
to move on. And that might be just the catalyst you need. So menonthepathtolove.com is the best way to reach me.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Monarch. I really
Yes.
appreciate it.
Until
You're
next
great.
time.
I always
And-
say, keep your heart open and stay on the path to love.
Thank you. I say,
Thank
oh,
you.
thank you for joining us. Until next time on the Poison Honey podcast.